This is Pastor's Perspective. We're here every Monday through Friday providing answers on a variety of topics, including the Bible, end times, other religions, and the family. Call right now with your question at 1-888-564-6173. That's 888-564-6173. You can also post your question at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. And now here again is your host, Brian Perez.
Hey there. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Pastor's Perspective program. We just gave out the phone number, but we're not going to take calls, at least not right away, because we've got a special guest that's joining us via Skype in the studio, Pastor Brian Brodersen from Calvary Chapel, Costa, Mesa in Southern California. Cheryl Brodersen will be on the program as well. She's on her way in. But joining us via Skype, we've got a guy who we haven't had on in quite a while now. We used to have him on like just about every Friday when the whole COVID thing was at its peak, and then it kind of leveled off. But he's back today because we want to talk about COVID again, and specifically the vaccine and all the different questions people have about it. It's Lou Wing, who is a toxicology consultant in the biopharmaceutical industry. He's with us today on Skype. Dr. Wing, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Great.
It's great to see you, my friend. I was out speaking at the Bible College today, and they informed me that you had been there just recently.
Yep. I had. Oh, amazing semester there. Incredible.
Yes, I know. Great.
It is great.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, it's been really cool. We were talking, Joel and I were talking today. Of course, Joel is the director, and you know, he was saying that we have been able to navigate COVID with we've been able to keep going. We never had to shut the school down, so that's been a great thing. So
yeah, done.
So
yeah.
How you been? Otherwise, haven't seen you for a while.
Well, I have been extremely busy in light of COVID, and as far as dealing with a number of cancer treatments, very novel treatments. And so I've been a part of a number of them, which has been incredible. I've also, oh my gosh, I just received back from my supervisor in Scotland that they not only accepted my thesis, but now I'm submitting it literally. So it's done. So I'm like I can't believe it. It happened. So I'm really excited.
That is so good. And I'm excited and simultaneously jealous that you are now done.
Yeah.
That you are done, and I still have some time to go. So, yes, like Brian was saying, Lou, we had many weeks where we were having COVID conversations. And then there was almost a season where it seemed like, okay, it's all going away. Let's get back to normal stuff. And then it never went away. And so here we are. We're back around. But, it does seem in some ways, like with the vaccine and so forth, that, it does seem like things are improving. Although I saw something briefly yesterday with Dr. Fauci kind of saying that we shouldn't get our hopes up, kind of a thing, or whatever. And I just like, oh gosh, forget it. Yeah. Who knows anything about this really? So give us kind of just give us an update on where things are at with COVID. But let's specifically talk about the vaccines.
Yeah.
And then the newest vaccine that's just, I think, coming onto the market, the Johnson & Johnson one,
right.
Kind of interested in that one, in relation to the other two that are already out there. So
right. I think it's there's a lot of, I have literally, since we've talked last, had so many varieties of different types of questions. Mm-hmm. And we're talking, the world of virology is becoming, front page news, into a point where now the people who just get a little bit of information, they see a little bit on something, and all of a sudden they extrapolate it into being this, devastating, situation. And I really warn against overinterpreting a lot of the concepts that are going into the making of these vaccines. Because, Moderna and Pfizer, people are aware of it pretty much, that they're uniquely different than any other type of vaccine. They are designed, they're engineered with what's called messenger RNA. And, no, I mean, I would love to say that that's like a common household word, but people are kind of getting it, right? And as soon as they kind of get this, or that it's, okay, let me just make it as clear as possible. Okay, this is not a normal vaccine. But that doesn't mean it's toxic, and it doesn't mean that the messenger RNA is going to get integrated into your human genome and you're going to become transhuman. I'm not saying but I've heard that. I've heard that there's this whole concept of we're messing with the human genome, and oh goodness, let me encourage you. Your genome is loaded with a variety of viruses. We have so many viruses in our world that if we could even list thousands of them, that would be a low estimate. And viruses only can exist by being in a host. So many of them have no effects on us whatsoever. Cold viruses are dime a dozen. We've never been able to make a vaccine from cold viruses because cold viruses simply change and mutate and alter, and we get so much variety that we could never keep up with it. Well, it turns out COVID, is technically a COVID is a coronavirus. It's a cold virus. So to sort of get around that, there's this whole idea about making a messenger RNA was really extremely novel in light of the fact that it's a message that makes just one piece of the virus. And it goes inside of a muscle cell. That muscle cell makes all this little piece of this virus. It excretes it, and that little piece that comes out of the cell is literally what's called an antigen. And that means that it's just a novel protein. Your immune system sees it. It makes antibodies against it. And that's how you're vaccinated. That's all those are. And they're 95, 98% effective. Why? Because it has nothing to do with giving you a virus. You're not given a virus at all. You're simply given this little messenger RNA, and it's attached to this thing called polyethylene glycol. Whatever. But that's this idea is that it makes it so that this messenger RNA has an attachment so that when it goes into your arm, it doesn't just dissipate into nowhere. It has the ability to just hang around long enough to be able to get inside of the cell. And that's really what the goal is. And there has been, people are so afraid of even that thing. Oh, the minute you mention that, it becomes horrifying. All I can say is that it is meant and designed in a number of different drugs, hundreds and hundreds of them. So it's a very common formulation. What is that all saying? That's saying that because you have no toxicity really with the messenger RNA and little to none, if any, with the polyethylene glycol, that when you get a shot, people say, well, you're going to get these massive reactions and allergics and so on. 350 people out of 1 million experience an adverse reaction. And what's that adverse reaction? It's simply you feel like you're sick, or your arm hurts for a couple hours, or maybe even 20 hours or whatever. But that's very rare with those two vaccines. All this to say is I'm getting the vaccine when my time is up, and I basically can get it because I'm an educator too, and I'm sort of in line for that. But it's not about the fear factor should be dissipated because it has absolutely no toxicity that we know of at this point.
So I had a friend ask me, which one is Bill Gates behind? That's that. Yeah, I was hoping for that reaction, but just kind of that conspiracy.
Lou just did a face palm.
Yes.
For those that are not watching.
Both palms, in fact. I mean, that was major.
A double palm.
A double palm. Yes.
I can just tell you that the hardest part in this whole process is not coming off like the arrogant scientists who, we're just, the scientists need to come out of their ivory towers and make this stuff clearer, because otherwise what happens is that we get all these myths that are just mythical, literally mythical. And what happens is it becomes political if the scientists aren't stepping out in the forefront and saying something. And that's why there's more to science than Fauci. I'm just saying. I mean, there is more. And there's a lot of the basic science that needs to be explained clearly. I've done several podcasts with different people on the East Coast. And, the questions that come in are just, wow. I absolutely can't believe. I mean, the most recent one, and you maybe have heard this one, is that they used embryonic stem cells to make
Yes.
in the virus
Yep.
or in the vaccine. And I just heard that and I went, oh my gosh, if there's ever one subject matter I would love to just put on the table, and I'm getting platforms, trust me, so I'm getting opportunities, but that human embryonic kidney cell line that they're making reference to was originated in 1970, and it comes from the Netherlands. This was, and its origin of that tissue, because it's called human embryonic, most likely was we don't know if it was aborted or spontaneous aborted, but they knew that the cells they were literally donated by the family, just like somebody would donate the cancer cells, just like the HeLa cell line that was donated by the woman who died of cancer, or the 17-year-old boy who donated his cancer cells for these cell lines. The cell line HEK273 has been so altered since then, meaning that they have exposed it to so many different types of genes that the cell is literally the gold standard for how you measure the quality of any biological based drug, whether it be a vaccine or a protein that's used for, biotechnology derived and so on. So these cells are literally, when I say a gold standard, it's like saying they are a screwdriver used for making a massive bookshelf. And the bookshelf does not have the screwdriver in it. It is simply a tool that is used. So it has, and I can't emphasize enough, the Catholic Church made a major deal about this, headlines that embryonic tissue is used. And if only some of the scientists would just stop that train and let everybody know that this cell line is used in every single drug that is developed. All of them. Everybody uses the HEK273, and the FDA requires it because it is the best resource for recognizing off-target and or target binding of any kind of a protein, whether it be an antibiotic or anything, or antibody that is a standard. So all that to say is that, that's a classic example of the fear factor. And all it takes is a little bit of science drives people away from God. A lot of science brings them back. That's a classic statement that we have to be reminded of, that science is not evil. We're not trying to hurt you. The whole idea is, it's like these signs that you see out that science is real. Well, if it is real, then just, I hate to say believe it, but that's kind of what the objective is. So anyway, I just really hope that dispels a lot of the fear.
You know what I think you have to do is write this book in parable. There once was a little R in it, It lived and it
I
meant...
would do that, but people get, even so, okay, I don't want to say damn if you don't, but there's the whole idea is that the minute you put that out there like that, then the scientific community demeans it, and then they discredit it, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't do anything right because you can't make science. It's like theology, right? You can't make theology easy because theologians get upset. Well, you can't certainly, you have to make it, but that doesn't have to be a smokescreen either, And this is why it's so important for us as scientists to, make the smoke screen, something that we can see through so that we can actually understand it. And then when they get the foot going in your arm, you have an idea of what's going on. Now, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is completely different. It's one injection only. The other two guys, they have two injections, mainly because the first antibody response is what's referred to as the IgM. It's a very large antibody, and it isn't around very long. So they wait 3 weeks, and then they give you another one, which boosts the IgG, and that goes up, and that can last in your system. And it's believed to be lasting anywhere from 9 months up to 3 years, they're hoping. So the clinical studies obviously haven't been conducted out that long. It's still in an emergency use approval from FDA. But the whole idea is that this vaccine most likely will not need to be re-updated because they're not seeing any new variants that are not being addressed by this. Okay, and what does that mean?
I got it.
Okay, but it's working for all the variations.
Right. Got it.
Okay? So
Yeah.
it's working for the variations. And so don't have to worry about the mRNA and all that. Moderna actually means messenger RNA, right? mRNA, Moderna. But this is why the Johnson & Johnson one came up and they said, you know what? We're going to go classical. We're going to do it with the standard way. We're going to use an attenuated virus, and we're going to see if it's more efficacious. And we're just going to compare it with what's Moderna and Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer have done. And so they took this virus and they do exactly what you do with the flu vaccine. You take the virus, you make it so that it is not replicated, and it's the actual native outside of the virus. And so when you take this and you scramble the RNA that's inside of it, once you give this to an individual, it goes inside of the cell, and lo and behold, it will make the components just like the Moderna and Pfizer do, but you're using the virus to do this. And it's not like you're giving when I say attenuated form, it doesn't replicate anything like a normal virus would do so. So that's what they're basically doing the classic flu virus methodology. So that being the case, they're saying now it's 85% effective. What is that difference in 10%? Well, honestly, from what the statistics and the populations are seeing, it's one administration. That's all it's needed. It has the temperature variability, so it doesn't have to have have to go through all that. You basically have it at room temperature. And, it's going to be a really nice way to compare the two different technologies to see which one is going to have a greater longevity. If it's the RNA that does, it's going to be a gold mine for vaccines in the future, because now all we're going to need is just this one messenger RNA, and that's it. We're not going to have to do all the viral preparations and so on. And that, hopefully the costs will come down as well. So. Anyway.
Okay, if there was like one sentence that you would want to tell believers out there concerning all of this, what do you think that the church and especially Christians need to hear right now?
Okay, Christians need to understand and hear that, yes, this virus does exist, and this virus does affect certain populations. And by getting a vaccine, it doesn't mean the virus won't be in you. It simply means that you're protecting yourself from any development of disease. So, people wearing the masks and all, I can get into that, double masking, whatever. All I can say, that's your choice. But the point is that get the vaccine, because what it does is it prevents you from, and even regardless if you haven't had any hint of it whatsoever, it's just best to have this only because it's going to develop a greater level of herd immunity.
Now, by the way, this is Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here with Brian and Cheryl Brodersen from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California, and our guest, Dr. Lou Wing. We're talking about the COVID and the vaccines. And so once somebody gets the vaccine, or if they've already had COVID, do they still have to continue wearing the mask, or can we just burn those things? How long do we have to wear the masks?
Okay, I can't tell you how I would love to give you more science on that. I would. I know that the mask has become a very great political tool. And so we're really struggling with it. And that's why I'm not going to say, I won't even infer that the vaccine can become a political tool. However, and I say however with that in mind, is that as you'll notice in our culture, it does seem to be very interestingly segmented into vulnerable populations. And as we're seeing this, many colleagues are saying, well, they almost like they have just left the conversation completely and just said, you know what, I'm just going to live my life and I'm just going to take my chances because that doesn't seem to affect me at all. And yes, that is possible. The only reason why I would object to that is because all of us are reservoirs. That's kind of like a microbiology term in terms of, we all are carriers of so many pathogens. We don't realize that. Our bodies, though, are uniquely designed to be able to have immune systems that are really good and some that just aren't. And they can have a lot to do with anything from your diet to your environment, to your emotional circumstances, to all of it. And so, believe it or not, anxiety can have an immune effect on you. Depression is a major immunosuppressant. So, our well-being is so contingent on the status of our immune system that's why having a vaccine is simply assuring that regardless of the condition of your body, that there are antibodies present that will take it out regardless. And that's one thing. So I think having a mask on, driving alone in your car is your own choice. Just remember that what a vaccine is doing, or what a mask is doing, is it's designed and meant to block secretions from your nose and your mouth. It's not to prevent them from coming in, because the possibility in the environment, jogging, and any of these kind of virions flying around that can try to get into you that way is, and I don't want to say virtually impossible, but the minute you're outside, you have changed those respiratory droplets into single virions that are floating around to parts per trillions that are in the environment. So getting it by breathing outside is, I would love to say, absolute impossible. It's next to that, though. So you're going to get the flu a lot faster. And just as a sidebar on that one, as far as the vaccines are concerned, there are thousands of times more adverse events from a flu vaccine than the COVID vaccine. Just saying. So anyway.
Okay.
Sorry, it sounds like I'm mad, but it is kind of that point where we're that place in our culture.
Well, I felt like this has to be addressed. And Lou, one of the reasons why we really wanted you is because you've been on the cutting edge of the research and the making of this vaccine. And it's interesting because I had a friend and I was talking to her yesterday and she's like, Bill Gates and, fetal tissue. And I said, well, Dr. Lou Wing. And she's like, wait, because she knows all your relatives and she trusts your relatives. So she's like, wait, I would trust what Lou said because I know he's a Christian. I know he loves Jesus. I know he would not lead us down anything that's going to make us go, where is the Antichrist? I want to take the mark now. And there is so much fear that this is going to change our minds, and that's what I find is all this conspiracy theory and all this superstition that, I'm frankly surprised at how many people are buying into this superstition and, not trusting the Lord and feeling like I've got to defend myself because the Lord might allow something to happen to me that would have mind control. And, and that's why I was like, Brian, we've got to have Lou address this and speak to this.
Amen. And I look at one of the hardest things in this is why it is so often the sense of the feeling of what it must have been like in the dark ages when, people would just use any remedy. Even, I hate to say it, but, we're kind of like in that place where, we'll do anything to bring sort of that solace and that peace because the enemy of our souls is doing everything he can to keep us in that spirit of fear. This is the result of all of this isolation. You watch these cooking channels and you'll see how they put all these little things in the pan and they put the lid on it and then they pull it up and they see what's called a reduction, right? That's exactly what's happened to the body of Christ. We've been reduced. And what we really are is what's really coming out. And that's why so many of them, I'm just saying in San Diego, so many of the large, very, observational churchianity down here has been reduced dramatically. The numbers that are attending, that are the churches that are opening up now, because they really have been learned how to be severed from the body. And this is what's happened, is that the more we get severed from the body and the more we sort of can do it on our own and isolate, we develop our own philosophies and theologies. And the enemy is doing everything he can at the core of that to bring fear. And that's why, again, I say, the connection of the science to this is that the real science in all of this isn't so that we can buy into the Bill Gates world, isn't to try to make a lot of money. We've recognized what this is. Miraculously, we've been able to solve what would be the best and most effective way of generating an antibody response that would be conducive for this specific virus. Is it astounding how quickly this all happened. And though, within all of that, I know people are going like, well, then, this sounds so complicated. I don't want this thing in my arm. That the flu vaccine is far more complicated than what this is. So all I can say is that trusting at this point in our culture begins by getting into fellowship. Just go get in the Word with your brothers and sisters. And we got to dispel the spirit of fear first. Once our faith starts to emerge again, we're going to realize that it's not about the vaccine. It's about what's happening in our culture right now. And we're, as literally faith agents, bringing about as examples to the world about how we're going to behave in this, I'm going to say, reduction of who and what we really should be and what God's called us to be as ambassadors of Jesus Christ. And in the core of all that, we can't let the politics and or the bad science be the driver of this, because that's really what has happened. So I think this message needs to go out in magnitudes more, and it's going to. I just think there has to be more of this discussion and letting people actually be honest with what their real fears are, and letting science, alleviate that, mythology, really. So.
All right.
Yeah. So I heard today, Lou, that from a pretty good source, that it looks like the airlines are going to ultimately end up requiring the vaccine for air travel. And I've already suspected that international travel is probably going to, countries are probably going to require people coming in from the outside to be vaccinated. Do you foresee that happening?
I do. I see this as becoming, if you just sort of take it as far as the World Health Organization is going to sort of get more involved with this, regardless, and I just say this, it's so hard because it's been so demonized for the last year as far as, the way the politics has been involved with the science. We have to stay true to what this is. And okay, and all I can say is, yes, on a plane, because we do have recirculating air, I understand that we all have, we're all seats apart. It means absolutely nothing because you're underneath the vent. It's just and all of this recirculated air. You're just being infused with whatever is in the atmosphere. It's remarkable. And yet, in those filters, are not. It's okay. All I can say is that the air circulation is happening, and I agree. If you're going to take the vaccine to what it's supposed to be doing, and we're going to trust it for, being in public and being a teacher and being a healthcare worker and all, it makes sense to have transportation because that could be a great place to have a reservoir within, the air system. Viruses are probably the most, as I've given the analogy before, it is literally a marble on top of a mansion. That's exactly the size difference. So, they're insanely small. They're just a little piece, tiny little piece of DNA wrapped up in a sugar. That's all it is. So, Michael.
All right, we've got to take a break here on the Pastor's Perspective program. Back in a little bit, our guest today is Dr. Lou Wing, and we're talking about COVID and the vaccine and all that other stuff. Stand by.
Pastor's Perspective continues in just a moment. Stay with us.
Oh, where's my announcer? I don't know. I guess I'll be the announcer. Welcome back to Pastor's Perspective. Here's today's host, me. I'm Brian Perez. Thanks so much for listening today. In the studio, Pastor Brian Brodersen and Cheryl Brodersen from Calvary Chapel, Costa, Mesa in Southern California. And joining us on Skype, we've got Dr. Lou Wing, and we're talking about COVID and the vaccine and all that other stuff. And we are going to open up the phone lines if you have COVID-related questions or vaccine-related questions that you might want to ask Dr. Wing. So give us a call at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173.
All right, Lou, it's funny because I have friends who are listening right now. So they're texting me their questions on my telephone.
Yes, so you can call 888-564-6173 or just text Cheryl and she'll read your
If
question.
you're my friend, just text me.
Yeah.
But I have a friend who's really interested in getting pregnant. And this is what we've heard, that it is sterilizing men or sterilizing women or can have ill effects if you hope to get pregnant. Like that won't happen in your future. And, you know, again, I love your expressions right now, but they can't see this expression.
And I don't want to be demeaning. I promise you, that's not meant to be that way. It's only because we have to look at what this, okay.
Short answer and then explain it. Short
Okay,
answer.
good. You cannot have an effect on your reproductive organs from this vaccine.
Perfect. Yeah. And now you'll explain. Yes.
Period. And wherever that came from, it would be really good to know always whenever you get a comment like this and someone says it, I know it sounds really demeaning to them, but just make sure that people say, you know, when we talk about this in the Bible, a little bit of fire spreads, and this whole idea about the book of Proverbs about repeating a matter, don't repeat a matter if there isn't a resource. And it goes right back to, let me see the data. I can't tell you whenever I say that, though. People send me all these papers, and I'm going, I'm not going to read all this. And a lot of it is just out of context. It has nothing to do with what the actual issues are. Reproductive toxicology has yet to be truly understood with numbers of vaccines. And I don't say that that's not going to be the issue. It's because it is so unaffected by it. What's happening in your body is when your immune system is simply responding like it does to any other antigen in your body, and it makes antibodies. That's all this is doing. There's no hidden chips. There's no hidden agenda within this, because let's face it, if there were, and I'm just saying this coming from the FDA's perspective, if anybody added anything to this vaccine that wasn't accounted for in the drug manufacturing process or in what I'm involved in, the non-clinical or the clinical, not only would there be a lawsuit, but when a drug gets pulled off the market because of any sort of and we're talking, this has happened. There are people in jail because of this, because there's absolutely, and I say this because I do a lot of reviews of large documents. Some of these vaccine projects can be up to 300,000 or 400,000 pages. I'm not kidding you, with the non-clinical study reports. And then you start bringing in all the what's called the CSRs, the clinical study reports, and all of these reports that get generated to have any sort of questions as far as manufacturing and or toxicities that are related, that are outside of what's already been known and put on the label, is not only illegal, but like I say, that's the one agency that is not going to go under the bus. These guys are going to fight back tooth and nail, and they're not going to put up with it. So I say that because I've been in FDA many times, and they're trying to recruit me. I'm not going to work there, but I know that it would be interesting to just sort of have the inner workings, but I just no.
It's like working for the IRS.
Anyway, so go ahead.
No, I said it's like working for the IRS. Not going to do it.
Times 1,000. Are you kidding? Yeah.
No, you're not going to do that because you're working for the Bible College.
That's exactly right.
That is more important.
That's a much higher calling.
Yeah. So we got a few calls with some specific COVID-related and vaccine-related questions. So let's take a few of those, Brian.
All right. Okay. Here is Marilyn in California. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Marilyn.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
I have several concerns about the vaccine. And today I read on naturalnews.com and also the washingtonstandard.com about the COVID vaccine. And it said that the RNA is transported out of your cell's nucleus and will no longer function properly as a cancer tumor suppressor.
So Marilyn's asking if you'll have a higher chance of getting cancer if you get the vaccine.
Interesting. Okay. Now, we have to remember what the vaccine is made up of and what it's doing, because and this specifically, I'm only going to mention this because of Moderna and Pfizer. Those are the like 99% right now. The Johnson & Johnson is barely coming in, but that's a different issue. For the vaccines that have the messenger RNA will only go into, when we talk about a cell, we have a nucleus that contains all the DNA, right? And then the cytoplasm, which contains all these like organelles that are responsible for making proteins. And so it has nothing to do with the nucleus. Well, the messenger RNA that comes from these vaccines goes into the cytoplasm, and it becomes this template to make the protein that is responsible, that is on the surface of the virus. So that's all this does. It has nothing to do with the nucleus. All this to say that it has no chance of causing any sort of cancer because it doesn't even go near the DNA.
You know, I almost feel like we need a diagram because you're talking cytoplasm.
I know, yeah, exactly.
And
it's like, what is that? Right.
Yeah. And I know what cytoplasm is because I remember a young girl taking a baggie and filling it with water and these particles and said, see, the inside of this baggie is like the cytoplasm. It's like kind of the ocean or the sea of a cell.
Yeah, exactly. And every cell has got these things floating around in it. And that floating area, that's what they call the cytoplasm. But that big ball in the center of it is the nucleus. And that's where the DNA is. And that's where all of the, problems with cancer happen. So rest assured, this is not, and I can only say this coming from my own discipline, my job is I do a lot of genotoxicity testing for every kind of drug, including vaccines. If there was even a possibility of this causing genotoxicity, it would have been found out long before this was ever in the process of being approved. So rest assured, and I can say this because I say this with my own job and over my own Bible, there's no way that could have happened. So sadly, that's a really sad misnomer.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Isn't it interesting, though, Lou, that Marilyn, reads these couple of articles that are basically saying things that just, as you just said, are virtually impossible. But now, how many people are reading those thinking, oh, yeah, well, that's it. Then I can't get it.
Exactly. Brian, I'm telling you, this is why, I don't know, what's the best way of communicating this information in terms of, I don't know what people are reading. Why would they even have read that?
Yeah.
And why would somebody publish something like this without having any kind of clinical evidence of it? I mean, clearly, you couldn't start to do a clinical trial to evaluate that anyway. So I find it fascinating that could even become a thing.
Yeah.
But that's, I remember I had something that went wrong with me. My doctor said, whatever you do, don't read the internet. It will steer you the wrong way. And the internet has become a bastion of misinformation and slander, lies. Just Google my name and I'll read a lot of lies. It's just become a bastion of lies. And it's sad that it is doing this misinformation, but there are people who get off on telling lies and putting out misinformation because it makes them feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, Marilyn, thanks for your phone call. Cheryl, look what you started. Now my friends are texting me with questions. No, call 888-564-6173. This one here, do I have a higher chance of dying from COVID if I have diabetes? What do you say to that, Dr. Wing?
Okay. That's believe it or not, that's a very common question because, any sort of, disease that's got some related at all to, this ACE receptor and so on, could possibly exacerbate some level of, disease. There is no known known, and I mean this from the understanding in the sciences that I'm working in personally, not only of COVID exacerbating something along those lines, but the probability of that happening if you got the vaccine, if the vaccine is going to have no impact on your diabetes whatsoever. So I would encourage you, just because, and we talk about, the only reason why I bring up that herd immunity idea is that it does, even if you don't have any symptoms whatsoever, getting the vaccine is going to stop residual reservoir within you so that you're not a carrier. That's really what the vaccine is meant to be doing, is killing whatever is there potentially inside of your system. So, and that's not a direct answer to you. My direct answer to that is don't worry about it.
Okay, so I've got a way to maybe do a parallel. It's like we heard that somebody put piranha in the lake at Marietta.
Out at the Bible College.
So what you're talking about is it's just going to take out the piranha. It's not going to take out the catfish. It's not going to take out whatever other
the bass, the bluegill.
It's just going to take out the piranha in your system, in the lake in your system.
Yes.
See, I told you I'm gonna make this for children yet.
No, because that kind of works, but it's made me thinking. Okay, so is this virus really like a piranha? When it's interesting because it's a virus that we would love to get more information about its genome, and we're getting more as time goes on. But we have enough knowledge now to know that it has a similar pathology or disease process as other coronaviruses. This one just so happens to be more virulent for some reason, and in specific groups, because this receptor seems to be so prevalent in certain parts of the lungs, and so anyway, I just stop.
All right, 888-564-6173. How about we go to Mike in Southern California? Mike, what's your question for Dr. Lou Wing?
Yes, hi. Thanks for calling. Thanks for taking my call. I got over COVID last month, and praise God, I'm better. But I have a situation where I have a wife and I have a mother-in-law that's at our house who's 80 that's got Parkinson's. And the church I go to, which is born out of a Calvary, Costa Mesa church, they don't require masks. And people are walking into the church being greeted by ushers that don't have masks. And we haven't been going to church, and I'm struggling. Should I go to church, or should I be careful and not go to church because they're not wearing masks?
All right,
okay.
Dr. Wing.
That's okay. I totally appreciate that. And many churches are doing at this point, they're having a section of the church that is masks and then another section that isn't. You have to make sure that what church you're in, that you're, okay, I don't want to say comfortable, but that's really what the word is, because the mask issue has really to do with what you're personally going to be protruding from you. And if you have had COVID, okay, that's great. You're most likely, I don't know how bad it was for you, but yes, you could say you're a carrier, but the point is that you've got an immune system that's working, it's operable, it took care of it. And if you're sitting in the church and it's inside without anybody with and the masks idea, if you're not comfortable with that, then I would encourage you to either sit to a farther end, but I encourage you, do not get out of fellowship if there's any way, because honestly, that sense of isolation, I believe very strongly we're coming to a phase of this herd immunity because so many are getting vaccinated, that we are going to be progressively getting out of this lid over us. And we're now going to be seeing more liberty and more sense of, normality in our culture. So I would say that some churches have been aggressively taking the masks off and not worrying about it and have had no major issues. Great. But I think a lot of it is going to boil right down to your own personal preference. And if the pastor of the church wants to do it that way, I don't think there's any mandate for him to make everybody wear a mask because somebody's going to come in and tell him to do so. I believe that there's enough science both directions.
You mentioned liberty. Today, California announced that amusement parks are going to reopen on April 1st. I don't know if that's an April Fool's joke. I don't think it was. But yeah, there'll be like 15% capacity, Disneyland, Universal Studios, all of them here in Southern California. But yeah, that was just announced about an hour ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yep.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
888-564-6173. Do you have a question? Do you have a text question?
So what you're actually saying, Lou, is that so he's already had COVID. So it's the chances of him getting it and bringing it home to his family are pretty small. Then bringing it back into the house to his 83-year-old mom. He's concerned about his 83-year-old mom.
Exactly. And one of the things about it is that, just because he's had it doesn't mean it still isn't there.
Okay.
And so that's just the same thing with being vaccinated. It's not a treatment. It's simply getting the army available in your system. So it's not that the virus is going to come and go from you. It's not going to be the ultimate killer of the virus. Okay, that's an important thing to remember. We're all residual carriers. That being the case, having a mom in the house, because she may be more vulnerable, it is better for him to take precautions in his home because of that. So I would say, anybody that's in their 70s and above, I've got a mother-in-law who's 95, and she's doing great, but she's taking a lot of precautions, and she's just got the vaccine, and she's a lot happier right now. So she's able to have guests and so on. So that perspective, I just think, is useful in terms of bringing the peace. That's really what the objective is, and that's anytime we take medicines, the ultimate goal is the sense of, having that sense of well-being. And I believe the Lord uses that in many ways, but it's ultimately going to boil right down to, our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and God does have he's sovereign over all. And so we have to keep that in mind as well.
So good.
888-564-6173. Let's go to Eugenia. Your family in the Philippines is being offered a vaccine, Eugenia, but it's not one of the ones we're talking about?
Yes, not Moderna, not Pfizer.
What's it called?
It is called the Sinovac, or the scientific name, I guess, is Corona vaccine.
Uh-huh. Okay. And
so, am I on the air now?
Yes.
Right. I know that there are certain international vaccines right now that are, when I say adequate, they're not toxic, but they're not as effective as what we were finding with Pfizer and Moderna. Now, sometimes they're not available internationally yet. I know that AstraZeneca is going farther with theirs. Theirs is still had some issues in the UK, but they're still being used in Europe and so on. So most likely you have something along those lines. I know Russia has one that is very effective, unfortunately. But some of the international vaccines that are coming out aren't as competitive. So there is a real stir for Pfizer to sort of step it up and have its international, because it's an international pharmaceutical organization, to have them available, like in the Philippines and so on.
All right. Eugenia, thank you for your phone call today. 888-564-6173. Let's maybe Tiavia. You're next on Pastor's Perspective with Dr. Lou Wing. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
Yeah.
I would like to ask, my grandmother got the vaccine, and she had a severe reaction to the vaccine.
Can you share what it was that happened?
She got a rash on the side that she did get the vaccine on, and it is, I don't want to say, it was a severe rash.
Okay. And yeah, so we were talking about some of the adverse reactions, and some people we know have even died after taking the vaccine, but it's a small number.
Well, there's only been one. Okay. And so that have actually, and that was usually, that's not usually, but that individual, it was of the age group in which that would have occurred. So that should not be even considered in the criteria of adverse events, that one death, and that because it really it's not necessarily the vaccine that was the sole cause of death. So and any kind of rashes that have been formed are extremely rare, and I only say that because a sort of cortisone shot has been useful and they disappear. And it's only because that reaction can happen with polyethylene glycol. I mentioned that molecule before, and in some cases that does cause some sort of reaction around the injection site. And or if it happens in the other side of the arm or anything, other parts of your body, it can also have that side effect. But it's only because that's the carrier of the messenger RNA.
You know, I had a shot after my dad passed away. They insisted on giving me a tetanus shot. And I don't know what it was. It was either the woman who gave it to me, but it was a tetanus shot. And I ended up with cellulitis because, so it's not necessarily the vaccine. It can often be, make sure that they're sterilizing, make sure that you're, because for me, it was the instrument. Right. Go ahead.
There's something in that most drugs have excipients, and those are like the molecules that surround the drug to make it more soluble, or depends totally on the route that it's given, like whether intradermal or intraocular, to make the drug so it's conducive to the environment you're putting it in. And if that's the case, then some of those excipients can often have reactions. And that's why the FDA is far more concerned, believe it or not, about the additives, excipients, impurities that are in your drug, because those can often even have, really not only adverse effects, but can often be toxic. And so the scrutiny on those is much higher often than the actual drug itself.
And the question we get all the time on this program, is the vaccine the mark of the beast?
Okay.
We get that so often, and we tell people no, but we still get the question. I don't think people are convinced. What do you guys tell them?
We have to remember what the mark of the beast is. And what is it saying? It's 666. That the whole idea about the mark of the beast is meant and designed for an economic purpose, so that you would have an identity and it would be part of the economy. You couldn't buy or sell without it. So clearly, having this vaccine to be something related to that, first and foremost, once the vaccine goes into your body, it gets absorbed instantly, and it's gone inside of all of your cells. So there's no evidence of it anywhere after post-administration. 1 week later, that it's absorbed into your cells, it's metabolized, and the spike protein is made, and you get antibodies, period. So to have that connection to it would be, I just encourage you to let that be dispelled and not let the enemy get a grip of your fear because of that.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who after this conversation is still saying, no, I am not going to get Moderna. I'm not going to get Johnson & Johnson. I'm not going to get, what's the other one? Pfizer. Anyone that comes out. What do you tell that person?
I just ask them point blank, why?
Okay, Lou, I've got one question. A credible pastor came out saying the Johnson one has the aborted fetal tissues. Is that going back to that standard cell you were talking about again?
Absolutely. There's not a chance you would ever, without pulling out all my data and all that. We could go through
and no 4-syllable words.
But I'm just, I think.
And we have 45 seconds.
Okay, 45 seconds. Take-home message is this. Aborted fetal tissue has absolutely no place in any of this discussion. Even the cells that were used back in the 1970s, that cell line is completely different than any other. It is no remnant of an embryonic, fetal tissue at all. It's not even tissue. It was a cell that was from a kidney from a embryo that was spontaneously aborted, meaning that that piece was ultimately cloned. They to keep it alive, they add these things to it to make it so that it can last for a long time, and that's what we use as a standard today.
Thank you so much.
All right. Great conversation today on the Pastor's Perspective program. We're going to archive it in just a couple of hours. You can find it on YouTube and Facebook and Spotify if you want to listen to it again or share it with your friends. Lots of good stuff that you need to hear about this. So thank you very much, Dr. Lou Wing, for being on the program with us. And, of course, Brian and Cheryl Brodersen from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. God bless you all. Thanks for listening. We will be back on Tuesday live to take your calls at 888-564-6173. Have a great weekend. See you at church on Sunday.
Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective. We trust you've been blessed and had your question answered. Join us Monday through Friday and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. The preceding was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.